Well, good morning and welcome again to The Journey. My name's Jeremy. I am lead pastor here, and this summer, for most of the summer, what we've been doing in these sermons in this series is trying to focus and fixate our minds, our hearts, our imaginations on Jesus Christ. And wherever you are on the spiritual spectrum or the spectrum of belief, that is a powerful and appropriate thing to do, because no matter who you ask, any secular historian, and they will tell you one of, if not the most influential person in all of not just religious history, human history, is Jesus Christ. And so it makes sense for us to go, well, let's see what he said. Let's see what claims he made. Let's see, who did he say he was? And we've been doing that through what we call the I am statements. There's just 7 places where Jesus says, I am, and then he fills it in with some imagery or metaphor. And as I said last week, as soon as Jesus says I am, like we don't even get past those first 2 words. As soon as he says I am, it's already an act of sheer mercy and grace and love. Because why? He's coming saying, I want to introduce myself to you. I want to explain myself to you. I want to reveal myself to you. You humans, you and me, who he created and to whom he has zero obligation and from whom he needs nothing, and yet he loves you and says, I am. I want to introduce myself to you. And it just begins with grace. And there are 7 of those statements, and each one is different. And, we hear, I'm the bread of life, and that's kind of cool. It's like the rich imagery of bread. I want to feed you. And Jesus says later, I'm the light of the world. Like illumination. I'm the good shepherd. I want to lead you and protect you and guide you. And in chapter 15 it says, I am the true vine. I want to nourish you. I want to bear fruit through you. And those are all sound like really cool. And we get to the one today, and it's a little different. It's actually one of the ones that sort of caused some of the most maybe controversy, some of the most debate and dialogue and division because it sounds so exclusive. This is what Jesus says. Look at verse 6. Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. You see why that one's a little different right off the bat? See, it's right here where some people go, okay, now this is where I have to depart from Christianity. I get some of the deal, but man, if he had said, I'll show you a way or I'll teach you some truth, I can get on that. But the way, the truth, the life, nobody can come to God and know God except through him. Isn't that arrogant? Isn't that exclusive? Like, is that really, are we really in the 21st century saying like Jesus is the only way to God? Is that what we're going to teach and say? Is that what Jesus believed? If you're asking that question, it's a great question. It's a very valid question. If you've sort of worked through that in the past and not your question, listen, that's a question that your friends are asking, or neighbors, or workers, or co-workers, that people are looking at it going, isn't it arrogant to say Jesus is the only way? Even my 10-year-old son several weeks ago said to me, Dad, Jesus is always commanding us to tell other people about him. Isn't that kind of arrogant? Isn't that kind of like rude to do that? It's a question that just sort of comes up, and we have to answer it. And in just a few minutes, I'll really try to address that for us, but we really need to hear first, like, what is he really saying? When he says, I am the way, if I walked up to you after the service and said, hey, I know the way, you'd be like, way to the crazy house? Like, where are you trying to go? And that's actually exactly what Thomas asked. Look at verse 5. Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you're going. How can we know this way? See, I love the fact that Thomas just says it, like he doesn't posture, pretend he knows all the answers. You ever been in a conversation and people are, just sort of pretending to go along because they don't want to look stupid and answer, or maybe you're at a Bible study and there's something being discussed, but you don't want to say anything because you don't look like an idiot. But you don't have to pretend with Jesus. You don't have to pretend at this church. You can admit your confusion. The disciples who were living with him admitted their confusion, and Thomas just asked him, and Jesus doesn't rebuke him. Jesus says, yeah, I'll answer the question. I'll enter into this with you. Where are we going? Where are you the way to? And he tells in verse 2 and 3, in my Father's house are many rooms. In other words, I'm the way to my Father's house. I am the way home. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, that where I am, you may be there also. Jesus says, I am the way, I'm the way home. I'm the way back. I'm the way back in. See, wherever you are, whatever spectrum of belief you're on, every single one of us as human beings, we have a hunger for home. We all hunger for home. We all hunger for this kind of concept of a place of rest and peace where we're known. And, every house, every place has distinctives, right? So, if you go to someone's place, their apartment, their house, every place has a distinctive smell, but you can't smell your own house, though, because you're at home there, so you need a few good friends to make sure you're still on the up and up and everything's, cool and kosher. Every place has its own distinctives. Just went to my hometown, back home to visit my parents in South Carolina. Got back maybe a week and a half ago, and every place has its own accent. I wasn't there a day, and my wife was already making fun of me. She was like, we've been here one day, and you've already reverted to your southern accent. Like the hillbilly is just coming out. You're just talking to your daddy, and you're just. I've been back a little. I think it's faded out again, hopefully, and I'm back in Missouri. So now instead of saying 44, I'll say farty far, because that's what we say in Missouri, or Missouri, depending on exactly, Because every place is important. Home is important. We say things like we need not just a house, but a home. We say things like, man, part of the American dream is to own your own home. Place and home is important. I've noticed that when you guys come in, if you're a regular here at The Journey, you tend to sit at the same place every week. Why? Because it's just, I don't know, you just feel at home there, right? You just feel like that's my spot, and I like to sit there. And there's just something to this idea of place and home. Why is it that we look out at like Syrian refugees and we feel so sorry for them? Why? Because they've been driven out of their home. Why is it that one of the most emotionally destructive things that can happen to a person is homelessness? Because they don't have a home. And Jesus is going, I am the way back. I am the way home. Every person hungers for it. I love to travel. I don't get to travel very much or go a lot of places, but when I do travel, I always have a great time. But inevitably, in every trip, no matter how much fun I'm having, I'm always like, okay, I'm almost ready now to get back home. I'm going to be back in my spot, my house. Why? What is home? See, home is the place where you're free. Home is a place where you're at peace. Home is a place where you can be you. Home is a place where people know your name. Home is a place where you're welcome. Home is the place where everybody is glad you're there and you're at peace, at rest. You can have adventure or action or whatever, but you're at home. There's acceptance. There's love. Even if you had a terrible childhood, even if your home growing up was chaotic and negligent and abusive, your desire is to get away from that, to get to a true home, a true place. And Jesus is coming when he says, I'm the way, saying, I'm the way home. Every hunger we have, every desire in our being at root is simply a desire. It's a reflection of our ultimate desire to get back home. The real hunger in our hearts is to be back in the Father's house. And see, what Jesus is saying is, man, the thing that you've been running after, the thing you've been hungering after all this time is me. It is to get back to the Father. And see, this comes from, it goes all the way back to the beginning of human history, right? The book of beginnings, Genesis 1 and 2. What do Adam and Eve do? The first humans, before God creates Adam and Eve, what does he make for them? A home. He makes the world, not just the world, but he makes Eden and a garden in Eden. And when Adam and Eve are in Eden, they feel at home. They are at home with each other. There's no conflict. There's no arguments. There's no difficulties. They're at home with the environment, with creation. They're at home with the Lord. Until they sin and they run away from God. And listen, here's the definition of sin. When we hear the word sin, we tend to think, oh, crazy religious word, dogmatic people. We think hellfire and brimstone. We think sin means there's this like arbitrary God who's up in heaven with his thunderbolts ready to strike you down when you miss one little rule or little law. But fundamentally, underneath all that, sin is simply running away from home. Sin is running away, going, God, I don't want your home anymore. Jesus himself defined it that way. Probably the most famous parable he told, Luke 15, prodigal son. What happens? The son comes to the father and goes, Dad, I want my inheritance now. I wish you were dead so I don't have to live in your home anymore, but I'll take your stuff. I don't want your goodness, your grace, your home. I'm going to make my own way. I'm going to build my own home. And what does that young man end up as? He ends up homeless and hungering for his father's house. It's a picture of the fact that we are all born into spiritual homelessness, and we are hungering, we are looking to get back home. And see, when Adam and Eve leave, when they're driven out of the garden, what does God put there? The very last verse of chapter 3 in Genesis says that God puts an angel, a mighty cherubim angel, in the entrance to now block the way back home. And it's just a little picture. I don't know if you find it cool, scary, awkward, cheesy, whatever, but this idea that he says there's an angel with a flaming sword that blocks the way home. So we all know we want to get back, but something is blocking us. The way has been blocked. The way to what? See, in the garden was what? The tree of life. And the way was now blocked, and Jesus comes and says, I am the way, I am the life. I'm the way back into Eden. I'm the way back into the presence of God. I'm the way back into the Father's house. And see, even though we've been driven out of Eden, even though we have been driven east of Eden, we can still hear and feel and sense the echoes of Eden in our heart. That every desire for pleasure or adventure or joy is really down to a hunger for God. C.S. Lewis talked about those desires like this. He said, creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. In other words, whatever thing it is we want in our heart, like there's something that corresponds to that. So he says, a baby feels hungry, there's food. A duck wants to swim, there is water. Men feel sexual desire, there is such a thing as sex. But if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world, another home. Our restlessness is because we're trying to get back. Bruce Marshall said it even more concisely, said, even the man who rings the bell at the brothel is unconsciously looking for God. Underneath that hunger is a hunger to get back home. And Jesus says, I am the way. I'm the way back to the Father. I'm the way to heaven. I'm the way for you to get back in. I've made the way. You might say, well, I'm not really that interested in heaven. It doesn't sound all that attractive to me. I kind of like this home. I like this world, this earth. But listen, in the end, what heaven will be is this earth completely purified, completely cleansed by the renewing, joy-filled presence and grace of God. You look around this world and go like, yes, it's broken, but man, there's so much beauty here, there's so much diversity and variation here. And what I would say is that this is the home, if this is the home that God gives his enemies, those who've run away from home, what kind of home is he preparing for his friends? What kind of home is he preparing for those who love him? See, if sin is running away from home, salvation is coming back home. If this is the home he makes for his enemies, what will he make for his friends? Paul said exactly that in 1 Corinthians 2:9. He said that no eye has seen, no ear has heard, the heart of man has not imagined what God has what? Prepared. Jesus says, I go to prepare a place for you. Nobody has even been able to conceive or imagine in their own minds or hearts what God would be for the last 2,000 years preparing for you. Jesus says, we all hunger to get back, and I am the way back home, the way back to the Father. Listen, are you following, are you trying to make your own way? Are you trying to build your own house? Or have you come to the way? We try to build our own house, we end up hungry and homeless. We build a house of twigs on a foundation of sand, and a storm is on the way. But Jesus says, I am the way back. Which brings up our first question of, are you a way back or the way back? Isn't it a little arrogant to say that? Well, what is he really saying? To see, did Jesus, when he said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me, did he mean to be arrogant and divisive? And how do we know? we have to look at the whole passage. Like, I had a old professor in seminary and grad school, and he would make us say these little mantras. Before we study any passage of Scripture, he would always have these little mantras, and one of them, he would say, okay, class, context is, and we would say king. Context is king. In other words, have you ever had anybody take your words out of context? You ever been taken out of context before and somebody manipulates what you said because they want to make it, you sound like this or you seem like that. They want to make you, in the light of how they want to cast you. Well, do you know who's been taken out of context more than any other person in all of history? God. The old saying that every heretic has his verse, right? Like, you can read 4 words and make it say anything you want to say. That's why context is king. I've always looked at what comes before, what comes after, what's the context of this? And if you look at chapter 14, it's in the context of a block of teaching between chapters 13 and 17, which is known as the farewell discourse. This is the last 24 hours of Jesus' life. And he tells them some pretty crazy things. He says, hey, by the way, Judas is going to betray me. Peter's going to deny me. This is all chapter 13. And by the way, I'm going away, and where I'm going, you can't come right now. And they're like, what? They don't even know what to do with it. And so on the night that Jesus is going to get arrested and betrayed, they should be gathered around him like, bro, let's pray for you. Like, man, what are we going to do? Let's just encourage you and strengthen you. And instead, he's encouraging them. Look at verse 1, at the context. He starts this passage by saying, let not your hearts be troubled. He doesn't say, I am the way, as some kind of crazy confrontation. Yes, the gospel is always confrontational because it overturns our desire to be autonomous and desire to run away from home. But he doesn't say it in the meaning of let me be arrogant and divisive, let me be confrontational here. He says it for consolation. He says, let not your hearts be troubled. I know that a lot of you are coming in this morning and you have troubled hearts. You're in a place of just pain. You're in a place of difficulty. Your heart is troubled, and Jesus says, let not your heart be troubled. You're thinking, I don't know the way to go. I don't even know what to do anymore. I am the way. You're like, I don't even know what's true anymore. My life is so chaotic, out of control. I am the truth. Like, I don't know what's happening. My life is just nuts, and I feel like it's just life is being drained out of me. I am the life. He says it not in the context of confrontation, but for consolation. And that's how we have to read it. When Jesus says, I am the way, it is not as a weapon. He doesn't say it as a weapon. He says it as a welcome. And too often, religious people, even Christians, have used the gospel as a weapon. And Jesus says, no, it's a consolation. It's not a weapon, it is a welcome. We have to admit the fact that many religious people, even Christians, have used the idea, oh, I know the truth and I feel superior about the truth, and therefore they've used it to create division or violence or whatever. But if Christians have acted that way, they have done that in spite of their deepest beliefs, not because of them. Because at the root of Christianity is this man, Jesus, who says, I am making a way even for people who hate me, even for people who oppose me, even for people who would mock and scorn me. I don't return evil for evil. I return good for evil. That is what is at the heart of our faith. That's why we talk about even theology of the bottle works. It'd be great if it was Bible works, wouldn't it? The theology of the bottle works part is for Christians to come and learn how to interact with people who think differently and treat people with dignity and respect. That's what Peter taught us. In 1 Peter 3, he says, yes, give an answer for your faith, but do it with gentleness and respect, because that's who your Savior is. It's not a weapon to beat people over the head with. It's a welcome. But it's also not a weakness. See, we sort of live in a time, like I said, where that's a big objection. Man, it sounds very exclusive. It sounds very arrogant for Jesus to say, I am the way, and no one can come except through me. It sounds like a weakness. It's where I have to walk away from this faith. And there are two little stories or illustrations that people usually use with this. One is you probably heard them both, the mountain illustration, right? God's like the summit of a mountain, and everyone has a different path to the top. Every religion is a different path to the top. And yeah, they're all different, but eventually they all get to God. And there's another one about elephant and three blind men. Have you heard that one? The rabbi and the priest walk into a bar here. The story is the three blind men were stumbling around, and they fell into a pit. And into that pit, an elephant had already fallen. And so they're blind. They don't know where they are. They don't know what this big thing is in front of them. They're trying to figure it out and describe it to each other. And one walks up and grabs the elephant's trunk and says, an elephant is long and slender like a snake. And the other blind man goes, you're crazy. You're all wrong. He's got the leg of the elephant. No, an elephant is like it's short and huge like a tree trunk. And the third blind guy's like, you're both wrong. He's on the side of the elephant. No, an elephant's broad and wide and leathery. And so you see the conclusion of the story, right? The meaning of the parable. So you see, that's what all religions are like. All religions are simply have part of the truth, and they are describing the part that they have, but none of them grasp the whole truth. None of them can see the whole picture. That sounds right, doesn't it? I mean, it sounds humble. It sounds inclusive. I hear it, I'm like, what is the answer to that? Like, think about it for a minute. What is the answer? The answer is, it sounds on the face of it like it's so humble and like it's so inclusive, but at the reality, it is very exclusive. It's very arrogant, because the story is being told from the vantage point of the person who sees the whole truth. The story is being told, the person goes, hey, yeah, this religion's blind, that religion's blind, that religion's blind, but by the way, I can see all of it. It's told by the person who says, I am claiming to know more than even a religion, that even Christianity claims, because I know that there's not just one way to God. There's only one way to look at all religion. I know what all religions see. I know how God fits into all of history. That's the claim being made. And by the way, what they're saying is, if there's a God, he's a God like this, that people, he's kind of laid back. He doesn't care what people believe. There's different people that grasp him in different ways. He's all cool with that. And therefore, that excludes any person or any religion who has any specific ideas about who God is, which is at least 4 billion people on our planet. You've just wiped them off your inclusivity map. So it sounds humble at first, but it's being told to the person who sees the whole truth, who says, you only grasp this, this, and this, but I can grasp the whole truth. And see, therefore, there's really no way around there's no way around exclusivity. We all are exclusive. I don't care where you are, you will have to be at some level. What about the whole mountain illustration? That sounds right. It makes common sense, right? We can all kind of get up to the mountain at different ways, but same thing for that one, right? It's told from the person looking back at the mountain going, I can see the whole mountain. I can see every path. I can see how every person is doing it, because I'm up here. I'm sort of omniscient. But at the heart of it, the reason that a Christian can't accept the whole mountain parable is because it makes sense for the way most of the religions works, but it doesn't make sense for the way Christianity works, because Christianity is the opposite of that. See, the mountain illustration says that God is at the top of a mountain waiting for the elite to get up there. God's at the top waiting for people to climb up and make it to him. And Christianity says, no, God's not on top of a mountain waiting. He's on a cross hanging. That God's looking and going, you can't make that. There is no path up to me, so I came down to you. Jesus is the one who came down the mountain. Jesus is the one who said, yes, there's this massive gulf, this chasm between you and God. I'll fall off in the chasm. I'll fall off into the pit, and I'll build the bridge across. You can't buy it, because the gospel says you don't work your way up to God. He loves you so much, he's given you his grace, and he's made a way for you where there was no way. And Jesus says, I am the way. I went into the chasm. I built the bridge. I went and took the sword out of the cherubim's hand because it fell on his neck. The sword was broken on Jesus so that he can open the way back to paradise for you. It's this picture of Jesus going, I am the way. The way is not a weapon. It's not a weakness. It's a welcome. Jesus is saying, I'm rolling out the welcome mat for you. I'm opening the door. I want a place for you to be home. He's calling you home. That's what he's doing in the gospel. He's saying, I know that you couldn't get to me, so I came to you. I am. I'm revealing myself to you. He's calling you to come home. Stop wandering in your wilderness, to stop wandering in your house of twigs, and to come home to his house. And he says, I made a way. It's not a weapon. It's not a weakness. It's a welcome. So last year, my wife and I went for our anniversary. We had a friend that gave us a certificate to a B&B. They had won it somewhere or whatever. They couldn't use it. They gave it to us to spend a night at this B&B. We were very excited. We're going to do it on our anniversary, and it was in Clarksville, Missouri, and I'd nenever been that far north on Highway 79, beautiful area, but Clarksville is this tiny little town, and we came into Clarksville, and we went through it, didn't even notice it. Turned around, came back through. I did meet someone from Clarksville last service, so she wasn't offended by that. I grew up in a similar kind of town, but we just couldn't find it. We were like GPSing, can't find it. No, it's not on the satellite. We're calling the B&B. Nobody's answering the phone. We're like, where are we going to spend the night? We're in the middle of nowhere. And so I said, there's one gas station in Clarksville, Missouri. And I said, let's pull in there and just ask somebody. These people live here. They got it. Somebody's got to know. I pull in. I start telling the clerk. And there's a guy behind me, and he hears what I'm saying. Good old boy, super nice. He's like, oh, man, I know exactly where you're talking about. He's like, if I couldn't tell you, you'll never find the way there if I try to tell you. I will take you there. Just follow me. I'll get in my truck. You follow me, and I'm going to help you get there. I'll show you the way. And I looked at him, and I said, you arrogant bigot. How do you think you know the way more than I know the way? Of course not. I said, let's go. Show me the way. Now, my wife did pull up like 911 on the speed dial. Like, I don't know what this dude's doing. She was a little nervous. But he did. He showed us the way. See, it's not arrogant to show someone lost the way home. And Jesus comes and says, I'm the way. I am the way. I've made a way. This kind of accusation wouldn't even have thought to come in the minds of people in Jesus' day, because you know what maybe one of the biggest criticism Jesus was? Jesus wasn't criticized for being too exclusive and only a few people could get through, and how about that? One of the biggest criticisms about Jesus was the inclusivity of his community, the diversity of his community, the people that he was constantly bringing in that everybody else thought, you got no chance with God. You got no way to know anything about God. The criticisms, Luke 15, it says the religious people grumbled because Jesus welcomed sinners. He hung out with them. He ate with them. That's why he says in verse 2, my Father's house has what? Many rooms. It's expansive. It's a massive estate. It's a beautiful place. It's a place where you will live and learn and grow. And I am the way there. See, Jesus was not criticized for his exclusivity, his arrogance, his divisiveness. He was criticized for his inclusivity. Like he called 12 disciples. Just think for two of these guys. One guy's named Matthew. He's a tax collector. To be a tax collector means he's a Jewish dude who they would have considered like Benedict Arnold. He's a Jewish dude who says, I am going to extrapolate and extort my own Jewish people to pay taxes to this pagan Roman Empire. That's who Matthew was. He called this other dude named Simon the Zealot. And if you don't know who a zealot was a person zealous for the revolution in Israel. And the zealots would walk up to people like Matthew, the tax collector, in the market, had a little Sakari knife under his, ancient, robe, flowing around. I don't know how he got it out of there, but he had a little knife, and he would walk up, grab the tax collector, knife to the ribs, back out, and he's on his way. That's what the zealots did. And Jesus brings those two men in a community together. See, Jesus brought in strippers and prostitutes. Jesus had sinful women of the night washing his feet and worshiping him. Jesus went to dinner with people that nobody else would go to dinner with. He was not criticized for his arrogance and exclusivity, but for his love and inclusivity. The question is not whether or not you're going to have exclusive beliefs, but what kinds of exclusive beliefs are going to lead to the greatest diversity, the greatest inclusivity. And the early church got this. The first couple centuries of the church got this. Like, the Christians came on the scene and no one had ever seen these kinds of communities like the Romans, the Greeks. They didn't mix rich and poor, but suddenly Christians did. And the Jews, they didn't mix races, but suddenly Christians did. Here were these Christians forming communities of all kinds of different races and classes of people. In that society, women were second-class citizens, property, and all of a sudden women's rights began to be elevated in Christian communities, and women were taught. They weren't even taught in that day. Jesus taught women. Women were part of his followers. Like, no one had ever seen a community like this. Stuff that we just take for granted as common sense today was created by the formation of Christianity because of who Jesus is. And as a church, that is supposed to what we are supposed to represent. Like, that early community confounded religious people and confounded irreligious people because they were like, what is happening here? Because all these people were drawn together not because they had the same political platform, not because they looked the same or had the same backgrounds, but because they had found the way home. They had met Jesus, and that is what had brought them together. And that is what we are supposed to reflect, this idea that in him, his Father's house has many rooms, and we get to come home to him. That's who he is. See, Jesus is the way, not because he's arrogant, not because he's divisive, but because he made the way. Verse 3, he says, I go to prepare a place for you. That means I'm going to the cross to pay the debt so you have somewhere to go. See, in the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus dies on the cross, you know what happens? It gives us a flash into the inner side of the temple. And the temple was set up just like the Garden of Eden. Eden had 3 rooms: Garden, Eden, and the outer court. And there's, if you know anything about the temple, there's a veil, there's a curtain blocking the Holy of Holies, blocking the return. On the east side of the Holy of Holies, there's a temple, a veil, a curtain that says no one can pass. There is no way through. There's a flaming sword here that will chop your head off if you try to get into the presence of God. And it says when Jesus died on the cross, that curtain, that veil, was ripped in two, and a way had been made. Because he is the way, because he made the way. He laid down his life. He went to the cross. He says, I will cross the chasm. I will bridge it. I will bring you home. See, verse 4, he says, you know the way. How do we know the way? Verse 6, I am the way. If you know Jesus, you know the way. So where are you right now? What side of the chasm are you on? Have you heard Jesus calling you, come home? I'm preparing a place for you. It's deep, but it's not complicated. It's profound, but it's not hard. What does he say in verse 1? If you want to come home, what do? You believe in God, believe also in me. Right now, put your faith, your hope, your trust, your belief. All you have to do is say, well, I'm lost. I'll never find the way. I'll never be able to climb the mountain. But Jesus, you came down the mountain to me. I believe in you. And you get to come home. What side of the chasm are you on? Maybe you've crossed it. Maybe you've come home, but lately you've just been running away. And Jesus says, you don't have to wander anymore. You don't have to run anymore. I prepared a place for you. You don't have to sneak out anymore. I've made a home. I've made a way back. I've prepared a place for you. Jesus looks at you right now and says, why are you trying to build your little house of twigs on your foundation of sand when a storm is on the way? And I've opened the way for you back to God through my death and my resurrection. Will you come back home? Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. Come home. Let's pray. Jesus, where we sense all the different desires and hungers in our heart that would take us away from you, Lord, I pray that we would see, believe, trust, and know that that hunger at its deepest part is really for you. That if we sense in ourselves a desire not satisfied in this world, we were made for another world. We were made for another home. And so, Lord, when we couldn't get back, you came down the mountain. Instead of sitting and waiting, you came and hung on a cross. And so, Jesus, I pray that every one of us would come home or come back home to you, because you are the life. Do your work in our hearts, in our minds, even as we take some time of silence to examine before you. the way, the truth, and the life.